At 63 years old, I thought I'd heard every possible way my children could wound me. I was wrong. The afternoon sun was filtering through the kitchen window of my modest two-bedroom house when my son Marcus called, and those 8 words hit me like a physical blow. Dad, you're too old to help me. I stood there in my kitchen, phone pressed against my ear, watching dust motes dance in the golden light while my world shifted slightly off its axis. Marcus was 35, a successful architect with his own firm, married to Sarah for 7 years now, and they'd just bought their first house. A fixer-upper, he'd told me excitedly just 2 weeks earlier, his voice full of the kind of enthusiasm I remembered from when he was 12 and discovered model airplanes. It's going to be a lot of work, Dad, he'd said then, but Sarah and I have some great ideas. Maybe you could come take a look sometime. That sometime had apparently arrived sooner than expected, but not in the way I'd hoped. The conversation had started innocently enough. Marcus called to tell me about a problem with the electrical system they'd discovered. The previous owners had done some amateur wiring that wasn't up to code, and now they needed to rewire half the house before they could move in. The timeline was tight. They had to be out of their apartment by the end of the month, and the electrical work was going to take at least 2 weeks. I could come help, I'd offered, the words tumbling out before I'd really thought them through. I did all the electrical work on this house when your mother and I bought it. Saved us thousands. There was a pause. Not the comfortable pause of someone considering an offer, but the loaded silence of someone trying to figure out how to let you down easy. Dad, Marcus had said, and I could hear that careful tone he used when he was about to disappoint me. You're too old to help me. Too old. The words echoed in my mind as I quietly said, Of course, son. You're right. After we hung up, I found myself standing in that same kitchen where I'd taught Marcus to make scrambled eggs when he was 8, where we'd done homework together at the scarred wooden table, where I'd held him while he cried after his mother died 5 years ago. The silence felt different now, heavier somehow. I'd been called many things in my 63 years. My late wife Eleanor had called me stubborn, my boss at the power company had called me reliable, my neighbors called me the guy who could fix anything. But until that moment, no one had ever called me too old. The thing is, I didn't feel old. Sure, my knees creaked when I stood up too fast, and I needed reading glasses to see the fine print, but my hands were still steady. I'd spent 40 years as an electrical lineman before retiring, 30 of those as a supervisor. I'd wired houses, installed transformers, and fixed power grids during ice storms and hurricanes. 2 months ago, I'd rewired Mrs. Patterson's kitchen when her contractor quoted her an outrageous price. But Marcus didn't know about Mrs. Patterson's kitchen. We hadn't talked much lately. Not since his promotion had him working 60-hour weeks, and Sarah had started hinting about children. Our Sunday dinners had dwindled to monthly phone calls, and those had become increasingly focused on his work stress and her biological clock. I walked to the living room and settled into my worn leather recliner, the one Eleanor had always threatened to donate but never did. The house felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. This was the same house where Marcus had taken his first steps, where we played catch in the backyard until the streetlights came on, where I'd waited up countless nights during his teenage years, pretending to read while actually listening for his key in the door. The photo albums were still on the bottom shelf of the bookcase, gathering dust since Eleanor's funeral. I pulled out the blue one, the one she'd labeled Marcus, birth to college, in her careful handwriting. There he was at 6 months, chubby-cheeked and grinning. At 2, covered in mud from helping me change the car's oil. At 16, lanky and awkward, holding up a trophy from the science fair for a project on renewable energy systems. Every photo told a story of a father and son who used to build things together. Birdhouses, go-karts, the treehouse that took us 3 summers to complete because we kept adding new features. When had that stopped? When had I become someone too old to help? I closed the album and sat back in the recliner, watching the afternoon fade to evening through the front window. The neighborhood was quiet. The Johnsons were probably starting dinner. The Martinez kids would be inside doing homework. Normal family rhythms that suddenly felt foreign to me. The phone rang twice that evening. Once was a telemarketer trying to sell me extended warranty coverage for a car I'd donated 2 years ago. The second was my neighbor Bob, asking if I wanted to grab coffee in the morning. I almost said yes, but then I remembered Bob was 71, and I wondered if Marcus would think he was too old to help too. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, turning Marcus's words over in my mind like worry stones. Too old to help. When had helping become about age instead of willingness? When had my experience become a liability instead of an asset? I thought about calling him back, maybe trying to explain that age was just a number, that I'd been handling electrical work since before he was born. But pride is a stubborn thing, especially wounded pride. Instead, I pulled the covers up to my chin and made a decision that would change everything. I would prove that I wasn't too old to help anyone. I just wouldn't help Marcus. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. If my son thought I was too old to be useful, I'd show him, and maybe myself, just how wrong he was. The community center bulletin board was a tapestry of small needs and local dreams. Missing cat flyers overlapped with guitar lesson advertisements, and yard sale announcements covered job postings. But tucked in the bottom right corner, written on pink construction paper in a child's careful block letters, was exactly what I was looking for: help needed. Electricity broken. Please help. Below the message was a hand-drawn picture of a house with jagged lines coming from it, presumably lightning bolts or sparks, and a phone number written in adult handwriting. I copied the number into my phone and walked back to my truck, Marcus's words from the day before still echoing in my mind. The address led me to the east side of town, where the houses were smaller and the yards were filled with more practical gardens than decorative landscaping. The house in question was a pale yellow ranch with white trim that had seen better decades. The front porch sagged slightly, and I could see where someone had attempted to patch the roof with mismatched shingles. A woman answered the door before I'd finished knocking. She looked to be in her early 30s, with tired eyes and paint-stained fingers. Behind her, I could hear the sound of children arguing over something. "Are you here about the electricity?" she asked, hope creeping into her voice. "I am. I'm Frank Morrison. I saw your note at the community center." She stepped back to let me in, and I found myself in a living room that was clean but sparse. Two children, a boy who looked about 8 and a girl maybe 10, were playing with building blocks on the floor while a baby napped in a bouncer nearby. "I'm Maria Santos," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm so glad someone responded. We've been without power in the kitchen and both bedrooms for 3 days now. The landlord says he'll get to it eventually, but..." She gestured helplessly at the children. The boy looked up from his blocks with serious dark eyes. "Are you going to fix the lights?" he asked. "Mama has to cook on the camp stove, and it makes the smoke alarm beep." "That's the plan, buddy," I said, kneeling down to his level. "What's your name?" "Diego. This is my sister Anna, and that's baby Carmen." He pointed to each family member with the pride of a child who takes his role as man of the house seriously. Maria led me to the kitchen, where I could immediately see the problem. Someone, probably a well-meaning but unqualified friend or relative, had attempted to install a new outlet and had apparently hit the main feed to the bedrooms in the process. The outlet hung askew from the wall, and I could see exposed wire behind it. "When did this happen?" I asked, already mentally cataloging what I'd need to fix it. "My brother-in-law tried to help last weekend," Maria said, her cheeks flushing slightly. "He meant well, but he's not an electrician," I finished gently. "Don't worry, this is fixable. Do you have a breaker box?" She led me to a small closet off the kitchen where an ancient electrical panel hung open. Half the breakers were unlabeled, and I could see where someone had attempted to trace the wiring with different colored electrical tape. It was a mess, but it was a mess I understood. "This is going to take a few hours," I told Maria. "I'll need to run to the hardware store for some supplies, but I should be able to get your power back on today." The relief that washed over her face was worth more than any paycheck I'd ever received. "How much will it cost?" she asked quietly, and I could hear the worry in her voice. I thought about Marcus's words again. Too old to help. Maybe I was too old to help my successful architect's son with his big house renovation, but I wasn't too old to help a mother keep the lights on for her children. "Just the cost of materials," I said. "Maybe $20, $30. Her eyes filled with tears. "I can't. That's too generous." "Ma'am," I said, "I spent 40 years working with electricity. If I can't help a neighbor, what good were all those years?" While I was at Morrison's Hardware, no relation, despite the name, picking up wire nuts, electrical tape, and a new outlet, I found myself thinking about purpose. For 40 years, my purpose had been clear: keep the lights on. First as a lineman, climbing poles in all weather to restore power to neighborhoods. Later as a supervisor, coordinating crews, and planning grid improvements. The work had meaning because people needed electricity to live their lives. After I retired, that sense of purpose had gotten fuzzy. Eleanor and I had planned to travel, maybe volunteer somewhere meaningful. Then she got sick, and my purpose became caring for her. After she died, I'd been adrift, filling my days with home maintenance projects and weekend visits with Marcus. But standing in that hardware store, calculating wire gauges and amperage loads, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Useful. Back at Maria's house, I got to work. The children were fascinated by my toolbox, and Diego appointed himself my assistant, handing me screwdrivers and asking endless questions about how electricity worked. It's like water in pipes, I explained, carefully splicing the damaged wire. It flows through the wires to power your lights and appliances. But you can't see it, Anna observed, watching me test a connection with my multimeter. That's what makes it dangerous, I said. You have to understand it to work with it safely. As I worked, Maria bustled around the house, tidying up and occasionally bringing me coffee or water. The baby woke up and was content to sit in her bouncer, watching the strange man fix things in her house. It took 4 hours to properly repair the damage and clean up the wiring in the breaker box. When I finally flipped the main breaker back on, the children cheered as lights came on throughout the house. The refrigerator's running again, Anna shouted from the kitchen. And I can see in my room, Diego added, racing down the hallway. Maria stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her children celebrate, and I saw her wipe away a tear. Thank you, she said simply. You have no idea what this means to us. But I did know. I knew what it meant to have someone show up when you needed help. I knew what it meant to have your children sleep in their own beds with working night lights. I knew what it meant to cook a proper meal for your family instead of heating canned soup on a camp stove. As I packed up my tools, Maria pressed an envelope into my hand. For the materials, she said. And a little extra, please. Outside in my truck, I opened the envelope. Inside was $40 and a note written in a child's handwriting. Thank you for fixing our lights. Love, Diego, Anna, and Carmen. I sat there for a long moment, holding that note and thinking about help. Real help wasn't about having the newest tools or the strongest back or the quickest reflexes. It was about showing up when someone needed you, bringing whatever skills you had, and caring enough to do the job right. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe I was too old to help him. But I wasn't too old to help, period. And there were plenty of people who needed help. That evening, I made 3 more phone calls to numbers I'd copied from the community center bulletin board. By the end of the week, I had a notebook full of small electrical jobs, a garage outlet that wasn't working, a ceiling fan that needed installation, a porch light that flickered. None of them were big jobs. None of them would make me rich. But each one would make someone's life a little better, and that felt like purpose enough. By Thursday morning, word was getting around. Mrs. Patterson had told her sister about her kitchen rewiring, and her sister had told her neighbor, and somehow my phone was ringing with requests for help. Nothing dramatic. A bathroom outlet that had stopped working, an outdoor security light that needed installation, a breaker that kept tripping in someone's basement workshop. I'd started keeping a spiral notebook to track the jobs, writing down addresses, problems, and estimated completion times in the methodical way I'd learned during my supervisor days. The notebook was filling up faster than I'd expected. That afternoon, I was installing a new outlet in Bob Chen's garage when his teenage grandson Kevin stopped by after school. Kevin was about 16, all elbows and enthusiasm, and he watched me work with the intense curiosity of someone trying to figure out how the world operated. How do you know which wire goes where? Kevin asked, peering over my shoulder as I connected the hot wire to the brass terminal. See the colors? I pointed to the black, white, and green wires. Black is hot. That's the one that carries the electricity. White is neutral. That's the return path. Green is ground. That's the safety wire in case something goes wrong. Kevin nodded seriously, like he was memorizing important information. Could I learn to do this? His grandfather, who'd been sweeping sawdust in the corner, looked up sharply. Kevin, don't bother Mr. Morrison with. It's not a bother, I interrupted. You interested in electrical work, son? Kevin shrugged, the way teenagers do when they're trying to look casual about something they care deeply about. Maybe. I like figuring out how things work. And my dad says electricians make good money. I thought about Marcus at 16, helping me replace the outlets in our kitchen, asking the same kinds of questions. When had he stopped asking? Tell you what, I said to Kevin. I've got a few more jobs this week. If it's okay with your grandfather, and your parents don't mind, you could come along. Learn the basics. Bobchin smiled. His parents would be thrilled. Kevin's been struggling to figure out what he wants to do after high school. That's how I ended up with an apprentice. Kevin proved to be a quick learner and an eager helper. He had good hands, steady and careful, and he asked smart questions. More importantly, he listened to the answers. By Friday, he was competently stripping wire and connecting simple circuits under my supervision. The key, I told him as we installed a new ceiling fan in Mrs. Rodriguez's bedroom, is to understand that electricity wants to flow. Your job is to give it a safe path to where it needs to go and make sure it doesn't find any dangerous shortcuts. Kevin was balancing on the ladder, carefully connecting the fan's wiring to the ceiling box, when he said, "Mr. Morrison, why don't you work with your son?" The question caught me off guard. We'd been working together for 3 days, and Kevin had heard me take several phone calls from potential customers, but Marcus hadn't called once since Tuesday's conversation. "What makes you ask that?" I said, steadying the ladder. "My dad talks about work with me all the time. Shows me stuff about his job. I just thought, if your son does construction." "Architecture," I corrected automatically. "Right. Architecture. Seems like you'd work together sometimes." I handed Kevin a wire nut. Sometimes families work better when they keep their professional and personal lives separate. It sounded reasonable when I said it, but Kevin gave me the kind of look teenagers reserve for adults who are obviously lying to themselves. That evening, I was updating my job notebook when my phone rang. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe it was Marcus. Maybe he'd realized he needed help after all. But the caller ID showed Maria Santos's number. "Mr. Morrison?" Her voice sounded strained. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I have a friend who needs help. Her name is Janet, and she's elderly, and her hot water heater isn't working. She can't afford to call a plumber, and I thought maybe." "What's the address?" I asked, already reaching for my pen. Janet Holloway was 78 years old and lived in a tiny house that was probably built sometime in the 1940s. She met me at the door wearing a quilted bathrobe and slippers, her white hair pinned up in curlers. "I feel terrible asking for help," she said, leading me to the basement. "But I haven't had hot water in 4 days, and the plumber wants $200 just to come look at it." The water heater was ancient, probably original to the house, and the pilot light had gone out. Worse, the thermocouple was corroded and needed replacement. It wasn't technically an electrical job, but I'd worked on enough water heaters over the years to know my way around them. "I can fix this," I told Janet, "but I'll need to get a part. It'll probably run about $15. Her face crumpled with relief. "Bless you," she whispered. While I was at the hardware store picking up a new thermocouple, I ran into Tom Bradley, who'd been my supervisor when I first started at the power company 40 years ago. Tom was in his 70s now, but still sharp as a tack. "Frank, I heard you were doing some electrical work around town. How's retirement treating you?" "Better than expected," I said, holding up the thermocouple. "Helping some folks with small jobs. Keeps me busy." Tom nodded approvingly. "Good for you. I tried the full retirement thing for about 6 months after Jenny died. Nearly drove me crazy. Sometimes we need to stay useful." That word again, useful. It seemed to be the theme of my week. Tom continued, "I've been thinking about getting back into some light work myself. These old hands still remember how to wire a panel. If you ever need backup." An idea began forming in my mind. "Tom, what would you think about maybe making this more official? There's definitely demand for affordable electrical work in town. You thinking about starting a business?" "Maybe. Nothing big. Just reliable service for people who can't afford the big contractors' prices." Tom's eyes lit up. "Count me in. We could call ourselves something like the Old Sparks or Gray Wire Service." We both laughed at that, but the seed was planted. Back at Janet's house, replacing the thermocouple took about 30 minutes. When the pilot light caught and stayed lit, Janet clapped her hands together like a child on Christmas morning. "Hot water," she exclaimed. "I can finally take a proper bath." As I packed up my tools, Janet pressed a $20 bill into my hand along with a plate wrapped in aluminum foil. "Chocolate chip cookies," she said. "Made them fresh this morning before the pilot went out." That night, I sat at my kitchen table eating Janet's cookies and sketching ideas in my notebook. Not job requests this time, but business plans. What if Tom and I really did formalize this? We had nearly 80 years of electrical experience between us. We could handle most residential jobs, keep our prices fair, and actually make a difference in people's lives. I thought about Kevin, eager to learn and hungry for direction. I thought about Maria, grateful for basic help she could afford. I thought about Janet, clapping her hands over something as simple as hot water. Then I thought about Marcus, somewhere across town, probably working late on architectural plans for buildings that would house businesses and families, creating spaces where people would live their lives. Important work. Necessary work. But so was this. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I thought it might be Marcus. Instead, it was Kevin. Mr. Morrison, my friend's mom needs help with an outlet in her kitchen. Can we do it tomorrow? I smiled and typed back. We'll take a look. Maybe I was too old to help Marcus with his big renovation project, but I was exactly the right age to help build something new of my own. Saturday morning brought the kind of spring rain that makes everything look fresh and green, and I was enjoying a second cup of coffee when my phone rang. Kevin was supposed to meet me at 9 to help Mrs. Patterson's neighbor with a bathroom exhaust fan, but the caller ID showed Marcus's name. My heart did a little skip. Maybe he'd changed his mind about needing help. Maybe he'd realized that experience mattered more than age. Maybe he was calling to apologize for his thoughtless words. Dad, Marcus's voice sounded strange, tight, with stress. Are you busy today? Not particularly, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. What's up? There was a long pause, and I could hear voices in the background. Sarah, and maybe someone else. We're having some problems with the house. The electrical situation is worse than we thought. I waited, letting him find his own way to asking for what he needed. The inspector came yesterday for our rough electrical inspection, and we failed. The contractor we hired apparently doesn't know code as well as he claimed. He's walked off the job, and we have to be out of the apartment in a week. My chest tightened. This was my son, in real trouble, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to drop everything and help. But those 8 words from Tuesday still stung. Dad, you're too old to help me. That sounds stressful, I said carefully. It is. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Sarah's been crying all morning. We've got boxes everywhere. The moving truck is booked for Friday, and now we don't have anywhere to move to. I took a sip of coffee and watched the rain run down the kitchen window. Have you called other electricians? 3 of them. The soonest any of them can start is next month. And the quotes. Dad, they're talking about $8, maybe $10,000 to bring everything up to code. $10,000. I whistled low. That's steep. We don't have it. The words came out in a rush. Between the down payment and closing costs, we're tapped out. Sarah wants to call her parents for a loan, but Marcus had always been proud. Too proud, Eleanor used to say. Even as a child, he'd struggle with homework for hours rather than ask for help, would wear shoes with holes in them rather than admit he'd outgrown them. Maybe there's another solution, I said gently. Like what? I almost said it. The words were right there. Like me. Like the father you said was too old to help. But something held me back. Maybe it was my own pride, or maybe it was wisdom earned through 63 years of living. I don't know, son, but problems usually have solutions if you look hard enough. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, listening to the rain and thinking about pride. Marcus was proud. He got that from me. I was proud too. Maybe too proud to offer help after being told I wasn't needed. But pride was a luxury neither of us could afford right now. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Rain's letting up. Still want to do the exhaust fan job. I looked at the message, then at my toolbox by the back door, then at the framed photo of Marcus at his high school graduation. In the picture, he was wearing his cap and gown, grinning, with his arm around my shoulders. We looked happy. We looked like a team. I texted Kevin back. Rain check on today? Family emergency. I'll call you later. Then I grabbed my toolbox and headed for the truck. Marcus and Sarah's new house was a 1960s split level in a neighborhood of similar homes, all showing their age, but with good bones. I could see the potential. It would be beautiful when they finished with it. But right now, it looked like a disaster zone. A dumpster sat in the driveway, filled with old fixtures and torn-out drywall. Extension cords snaked through the front door, and I could see temporary work lights strung throughout the interior. I knocked on the door frame. There was no actual door yet, and called out, "Hello." Dad. Marcus appeared from what I assumed was the kitchen, wearing work clothes I'd never seen before and looking harried. What are you doing here? Thought I'd take a look at your electrical problem, I said simply. His face went through several expressions: surprise, relief, embarrassment, and something that might have been hope. But I thought. You said. I said you were right. I didn't say I couldn't help. Sarah appeared behind Marcus, her hair pulled back in a bandana and her hands covered in paint. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she looked like she hadn't slept. Frank, she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. Thank God. For the next 2 hours, I went through the house room by room, examining the electrical work that had been started and abandoned. Marcus followed me like a shadow, explaining what the contractor had told them, what the inspector had written on his rejection notice, what they'd hoped to accomplish. The situation was bad, but not impossible. The contractor had made some fundamental errors, mixing up neutral and hot wires in several circuits, failing to properly ground outlets, using the wrong gauge wire for 20-amp circuits. Sloppy work that would have to be completely redone. How long do you think it would take? Marcus asked as we stood in what would eventually be the master bedroom. To do it right. I pulled out my measuring tape and started calculating wire runs. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we run into surprises. The word came out small, hopeful. I looked at my son, 35 years old, successful, proud, scared, and trying so hard to be strong for his wife. When had he gotten so thin? When had those lines appeared around his eyes? Marcus, I said gently, when you were 8 years old, you helped me rewire the basement workshop. Do you remember that? He nodded. You handed me tools, held the flashlight, asked a million questions. You were my best helper. I remember. You're not 8 anymore. You don't need me to hold your hand or make the decisions. But you do need help, and I know how to do this work. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Maybe we could help each other. Sarah, who had been listening from the doorway, started crying again, but this time it sounded like relief. Yes, Marcus said quickly. Yes, please. If you're willing to. I know, I said. Son, I interrupted. We all say things when we're stressed. What matters is what we do next. That afternoon, we made a plan. I would handle the electrical work, with Marcus as my assistant when he could get away from his regular job. We'd work evenings and weekends, and if we pushed hard, we could have everything ready for reinspection in 10 days. What about payment? Marcus asked awkwardly. I can't afford the full rate, but we'll figure something out, I said. Family rate. As I packed up my tools, Sarah gave me a hug that lasted longer than usual. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea how scared we were. But I did know. I knew what it felt like when the walls were closing in, when pride got in the way of accepting help, when you needed someone to show up and make things right. Driving home, I thought about the jobs I'd committed to: Kevin's apprenticeship, Mrs. Rodriguez's ceiling fan, the growing list of small electrical repairs around town. I thought about Tom Bradley and our half-formed plans for a business. I'd have to juggle everything carefully, but it could be done. Maybe being too old to help wasn't about age or ability. Maybe it was about finding the right way to offer help and the right time to accept it. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. It was Kevin. Mr. Morrison? My mom wanted me to ask if you'd come to dinner Sunday. She wants to meet the guy who's teaching me about electrical work. I smiled, thinking about Sunday dinner at a table full of people who weren't my family, but who welcomed me anyway. I'd like that, I said, but I might need to leave early. I've got a big job starting Monday. Sunday dinner at the Chun family table was a revelation. 3 generations gathered around a large rectangular table laden with dishes I couldn't pronounce, but that smelled incredible. Kevin had warned me it would be a little crazy, but I wasn't prepared for the warmth of it. The overlapping conversations, the gentle teasing, the way everyone talked with their hands while eating. Bob Chun introduced me to his son David, Kevin's father, who worked as a software engineer, and David's wife Lisa, who taught 4th grade. Kevin's younger sister Amy, home from college for the weekend, interrogated me about my electrical background with the intensity of someone considering a career change herself. So you really think Kevin could make a living as an electrician? Lisa asked, passing me a second helping of something delicious involving noodles and vegetables. If he keeps learning at the rate he has been, absolutely, I said. Skilled trades are always in demand. And Kevin has good instincts. Kevin beamed at the praise, while his grandmother, Bob's wife Margaret, patted his arm approvingly. "It's good to work with your hands," she said in accented English. "Make something real." As the conversation flowed around me, I found myself thinking about family dinners when Marcus was Kevin's age. Eleanor would spend hours cooking, insisting on proper place settings and cloth napkins. Marcus would tell us about school, his friends, his plans. We'd discuss current events, homework, upcoming family activities. When had those dinners stopped feeling natural and started feeling like obligation? After dinner, Kevin walked me out to my truck. "Thanks for coming," he said. "My parents really like you." "I like them too. You've got a good family, Kevin." "Yeah." He kicked at a small stone on the driveway. "Mr. Morrison, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Yesterday, when you left to help your son, did he apologize?" The question caught me off guard. Kevin was 16, but he was observant, and apparently I hadn't been as subtle as I'd thought about the tension between Marcus and me. "It's complicated," I said finally. "My dad and I fight sometimes," Kevin said. "Usually about stupid stuff, but we always figure it out." "What's your secret?" Kevin shrugged. "I guess we remember that we're on the same team." That night, I lay in bed thinking about teams. For most of my married life, Eleanor, Marcus, and I had been a tight unit. We'd made decisions together, supported each other through difficulties, celebrated successes as a family. After Eleanor died, Marcus and I had leaned on each other through the grief. When had that changed? When had we stopped being teammates and started being, what? Polite strangers? Distant relatives? Monday morning came early, and I was at Marcus and Sarah's house by 7 a.m., ready to start the electrical overhaul. Marcus had taken a personal day to work with me, and Sarah had arranged to work from home so she could coordinate with other contractors. The first order of business was mapping out the existing electrical system and planning the new circuits. We spent the morning pulling wire and testing connections, working mostly in companionable silence. It felt familiar, like riding a bicycle, the rhythm of working together, the wordless communication of two people who understood each other's movements. "Hand me the wire strippers," I'd say, and Marcus would have them ready before I finished the sentence. "Hold this steady," he'd ask, and I'd brace the fixture without being told what steady meant. By noon, we'd made good progress on the living room circuits. Sarah brought us sandwiches and iced tea, and we sat on upturned buckets in what would eventually be their dining room. "This is nice," Sarah said, looking around at the organized chaos of renovation. "I can actually picture it now." "It's going to be beautiful," I agreed. "You picked a good house." "Marcus found it," she said, smiling at her husband. "He saw the potential when I just saw problems." Marcus looked embarrassed, but pleased. "Dad always said to look at the bones of a house, not the cosmetics." I didn't remember saying that, but it sounded like something I would have said. How many casual comments had I made over the years that Marcus had filed away and carried with him? That afternoon, as we worked on installing new outlets in the kitchen, Marcus brought up something that had been weighing on him. "Dad, I owe you an apology for what I said last week. About you being too old to help." I continued working on the outlet connection, giving him space to find his words. I was stressed about the timeline, and I guess I was worried that. He paused, searching for the right way to explain. "I don't know. Maybe I thought if the work wasn't perfect, or if it took longer than expected, it would somehow be my fault for asking you." I looked up from the wire nuts I was twisting. "So you figured it was easier not to ask?" "Yeah, which was stupid." "Not stupid," I said. "Scared maybe, but not stupid." We worked in silence for a few minutes before Marcus spoke again. "When Mom got sick, you handled everything. The doctors, the insurance, her care, the house. I felt useless." "You weren't useless. You were grieving. There's a difference. But I should have helped more, done more, been more involved." I set down my tools and really looked at my son. He was staring at the outlet box, his jaw tight with tension. "Marcus, you came every weekend. You sat with her when I needed to run errands. You held her hand during the bad days. You spoke at her funeral when I couldn't find words." I paused. "You helped in the ways that mattered." It didn't feel like enough. "It never does," I said gently. But it was enough for her, and it was enough for me. We finished the kitchen outlets in comfortable silence, and I realized something had shifted between us. Not back to the way it was before. We couldn't go backward, but forward to something that might be better. Tuesday brought Kevin after school, eager to learn and full of questions about the work we'd accomplished the day before. I put him to work organizing wire nuts and cleaning up the debris while I showed him how to properly install a GFCI outlet. These are required in bathrooms, kitchens, and outdoor locations, I explained. They detect tiny electrical leaks and shut off the power before someone gets hurt. How tiny? Kevin asked, testing the outlet with the button press. About as much current as it would take to stop your heart, I said matter-of-factly. Kevin's eyes widened. That's really small. That's why we take electrical safety seriously. Electricity doesn't care if you're 16 or 60. It doesn't give second chances. Marcus, who had arrived home from work and was helping us run new wire to the bathroom, looked thoughtful. Is that what you meant when you used to tell me measure twice, cut once? Among other things, I said. Good habits keep you safe and save time in the long run. I use that expression at work sometimes, Marcus admitted. When we're reviewing architectural plans. My employees probably think I came up with it. Most good advice gets passed down, I said. Your grandfather taught me that one. We worked until nearly 9 that evening, making significant progress on the bathroom circuits. As Kevin packed up the smaller tools, Marcus pulled me aside. Dad, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about helping each other. What about it? Well, I know you've been doing electrical work around town. Small jobs for people who need help. I nodded, wondering where this was going. Sarah and I were talking, and we thought maybe after we get settled in the house, we could help you with that. She's good with bookkeeping, and I could help with estimates. Maybe design some of the more complex installations. The offer took me by surprise. You'd want to do that? I'd like to try, if you think there's enough work to make it worthwhile. I thought about my growing notebook of electrical jobs, about Tom Bradley's enthusiasm for getting back into the trade, about Kevin's eagerness to learn. There might be, I said. There definitely might be. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected phone call from Mrs. Santos. Mr. Morrison, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I have a problem. My neighbor, Mrs. Chun, not Bob Chun, a different Mrs. Chun, she has no heat. The furnace won't start, and she thinks it might be electrical. I grabbed my notebook. What's the address? The second Mrs. Chun lived in a small apartment above a Chinese restaurant, and her furnace was indeed an electrical problem. The control board had failed. It wasn't a difficult fix, but the part would have to be ordered. In the meantime, I told her, you'll need a space heater. Do you have one? She shook her head, looking worried. The forecast called for temperatures in the 40s overnight. Not dangerous, but uncomfortably cold for an elderly woman. I thought about the space heater in my garage, the one I'd used in the workshop during cold mornings. I'll bring you one to borrow until we get the furnace fixed, I said. Her face lit up. You would do that? Of course. As I loaded the space heater into my truck, I realized something. A week ago, I'd felt useless, cast aside by my own son, with no clear purpose for my days. Now I had more work than I could handle, a teenager who looked up to me, a son who wanted to partner with me, and neighbors who called when they needed help. Maybe Marcus had been wrong about me being too old to help. Or maybe he'd been right, but not in the way he meant. Maybe I wasn't too old to help him with his problems, but I was the right age to help everyone else with theirs. That evening, as I updated my job notebook, I counted 15 active electrical projects in various stages. Some were small, replacing outlets, installing ceiling fans, fixing flickering lights. Others were more substantial, upgrading electrical panels, rewiring basements, installing outdoor lighting systems. All of them mattered to someone. I picked up my phone and called Tom Bradley. Tom, it's Frank. Remember that conversation we had about making this official? Of course. You ready to be business partners? I think so. What do you say we meet for coffee tomorrow and talk about it seriously? You bet. First round's on me, partner. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the notebook full of people who needed help, thinking about Kevin's eager questions and Marcus's tentative offer to join the business, remembering the relief on Maria Santos's face when the lights came back on. For the first time since Eleanor died, I felt like I was building something that would last. Not just fixing what was broken, but creating something new and valuable. Maybe that's what family really meant. Not just the people you were born to, but the people who showed up when work needed doing and life needed living. Thursday started like any other day that week. Early morning coffee, a review of my job list, and a plan to finish the bedroom circuits at Marcus and Sarah's house. I was loading tools into my truck when my phone rang. The number was Marcus's, but the voice was Sarah's, and it was shaking. Frank, I'm at the hospital with Marcus. There's been an accident. My blood turned to ice. What happened? Is he? He's okay. I mean, he's hurt, but he's okay. She was talking fast, the words tumbling together. He was on a ladder at the house, working on that ceiling fixture in the bedroom, and the ladder slipped. He fell backward and hit his head on the concrete floor. I was already in the truck, keys in the ignition. Which hospital? St. Mary's. Frank, he's conscious and talking, but he has a concussion, and his left arm might be broken. The doctors are still examining him. I'll be right there. The 15-minute drive to St. Mary's felt like an hour. I kept thinking about ladder safety, about all the times I'd reminded Marcus to check the legs, to make sure the ladder was on level ground, to have someone spot him when working at height. Had I forgotten to mention it this time? Had I assumed he knew? I found Sarah in the emergency room waiting area, still wearing yesterday's paint-stained clothes, her face pale and drawn. How is he? I asked, sitting down beside her. Stable. They're doing x-rays now. She leaned against my shoulder, and I could feel her shaking. Frank, I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't been there. If he'd been alone. But you were there, I said firmly. And he's going to be okay. We waited. Hospital waiting is its own special kind of torture. The uncomfortable chairs, the antiseptic smell, the sounds of other people's emergencies echoing from behind closed doors. Sarah called her mother, then Marcus's boss, then their insurance company. I mostly sat and thought about accidents. 40 years in the electrical trade, and I'd seen plenty of them. Falls, burns, electrocution. The lucky ones walked away with scars and stories. The unlucky ones didn't walk away at all. When Dr. Martinez finally came out to talk to us, she was smiling, which I took as a good sign. Mr. Morrison is going to be fine, she said. Mild concussion, no skull fracture. His left arm has a hairline fracture in the radius. That's one of the forearm bones, but it's a clean break. We'll put him in a cast, and it should heal completely in 6 to 8 weeks. Can we see him? Sarah asked. Of course. He's been asking for both of you. Marcus looked smaller in the hospital bed, his left arm already in a blue fiberglass cast, a bandage on the back of his head. But his eyes were clear and alert, and he managed a sheepish smile when we walked in. Hey, Dad. Sorry about this. I wanted to lecture him about ladder safety, wanted to ask exactly what had happened, wanted to check every inch of him to make sure he was really okay. Instead, I just said, "How are you feeling, son?" Like an idiot. And like I got hit by a truck. He gestured with his good hand toward the cast. The doctor says 6 weeks minimum before I can use this arm for anything heavier than a coffee cup. The implications hit me immediately, and I could see from Sarah's expression that she was thinking the same thing. 6 weeks would put us well past their moving deadline. The electrical work would have to be completed without Marcus's help. Don't worry about the house, I said. We'll figure it out. Dad, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling. The work will get done. That evening, after Marcus was discharged with a prescription for painkillers and strict orders to rest, I sat in my kitchen making phone calls. The first was to Tom Bradley. Frank, I heard about Marcus. How's he doing? News travels fast in a small town. He'll be fine, but I'm going to need help finishing the electrical work on their house. They have to be moved in by next Friday. Count me in, Tom said without hesitation. When do we start? The second call was to Kevin. Mr. Morrison? I heard about Mr. Marcus. Is he okay? He will be. Kevin, I need to ask you a favor. Can you work some extra hours this week? I'm going to need all the help I can get. Absolutely. Should I skip school? No, but maybe you could come by after school every day, and we could work a few hours on Saturday. Deal. The third call was the hardest. Maria Santos had left a message asking if I could look at a problem with her bathroom outlet, and I had to call her back and explain that I'd need to postpone all my other jobs for at least a week. Mr. Morrison, she said when I finished explaining, you helped us when we needed it most. Now your family needs help. You do what you have to do. By Friday morning, I had a plan. Tom would handle the main electrical panel upgrade while I finished the bedroom and bathroom circuits. Kevin would help with wire pulling and cleanup after school. If we worked efficiently, we could have everything ready for inspection by Wednesday. The plan worked. Tom might have been in his 70s, but his hands were steady and his knowledge was encyclopedic. We worked together like we had 40 years ago, falling into old rhythms and communication patterns. Kevin continued to impress me with his dedication and growing skill. By Tuesday, he was confidently installing outlets and switches under minimal supervision. "You're getting good at this," I told him as we wrapped up the bathroom circuits Tuesday evening. "I like it," he said simply. "It feels, I don't know, important. Like what we do matters." "It does matter," I assured him. Wednesday morning brought the electrical inspector, a thin man named Rodriguez who had a reputation for being thorough but fair. He spent 2 hours going through every circuit, testing outlets, checking wire connections, examining the panel work. Tom and I waited in the kitchen, drinking coffee and trying not to look nervous. "Either we passed or we're in big trouble," Tom muttered. Finally, Inspector Rodriguez emerged from the basement with his clipboard. "Everything looks good," he said, signing off on the inspection. "Clean work. Up to code." The relief was overwhelming. I called Marcus immediately. "It passed," I told him. "You can move in on schedule." "Dad." His voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough." "You don't need to thank me. That's what family does." That weekend, Tom, Kevin, and I helped Marcus and Sarah move into their new home. Marcus, frustrated by his cast but determined to help, directed traffic and unpacked boxes while we handled the heavy lifting. By Sunday evening, they were settled in. Sarah had made dinner for everyone who'd helped with the move: Tom and his wife Jenny, Kevin and his parents, Maria Santos and her children, even Mrs. Chun from the apartment above the Chinese restaurant. As I looked around the dining room table, crowded with mismatched chairs and filled with the voices of people who had become more than neighbors, I realized something profound had happened over the past 2 weeks. I'd started the month feeling useless, cast aside by my son's thoughtless words. But in helping others, I'd found not just purpose but community. These people weren't just customers or acquaintances. They were family, chosen family, bound together by the simple act of showing up when help was needed. Marcus caught my eye from across the table and raised his water glass in a small toast. "To Dad," he said, "who proves every day that age is just a number." "To Frank," Tom added, who reminded an old electrician that retirement doesn't have to mean retirement. "To Mr. Morrison," Kevin chimed in, "who's teaching me that good work is its own reward." As the evening wound down and people began to head home, Marcus pulled me aside. "Dad, I've been thinking about that business partnership we discussed. Sarah and I would like to make a formal proposal." He handed me a folder containing what looked like a business plan. "Morrison Family Electric," I read from the cover page. "What do you think?" he asked nervously. I thought about Eleanor, who would have loved seeing her family working together. I thought about all the people in town who needed affordable electrical work. I thought about Kevin, eager to learn a trade, and Tom, ready to be useful again. "I think," I said slowly, "that this might be exactly what we've all been looking for." 2 weeks after Marcus's accident, I found myself sitting in a corner booth at Mel's Diner with Tom, Kevin, Marcus, his arm still in a cast, and Sarah, spread papers covering the table between coffee cups and half-eaten pieces of pie. What had started as Marcus's casual suggestion had evolved into serious business planning. "The way I see it," Sarah was saying, pointing to a spreadsheet on her laptop, "there's definitely a market for affordable residential electrical services. Frank's been booking more jobs than he can handle, and that's just word-of-mouth referrals." Tom nodded, studying the numbers. "In my day, most electrical contractors focused on commercial work or new construction. There wasn't much money in residential service calls." "Things have changed," Marcus added. "People are staying in their homes longer, upgrading and renovating instead of moving. And with housing costs so high, a lot of folks can't afford the premium contractors." Kevin, who had been quietly listening while taking notes in a composition notebook, looked up. "What about training? I mean, I'm learning a lot, but I need to go to school eventually, right?" I'd been thinking about the same thing. "There's a community college program about an hour from here. 2-year associate degree in electrical technology. You could do that part-time while working with us. We could help with tuition," Sarah offered. "Consider it an investment in our first official apprentice." The generosity of the offer clearly overwhelmed Kevin. His parents had been saving for his college education, but money was tight, and a 2-year technical program was much more affordable than a 4-year university. "You'd really do that?" he asked. "Kevin," I said gently, "good electricians are hard to find. If we're going to grow this business, we need people we can trust. You've already proven yourself." We spent the next hour working through the details. Tom would come out of retirement as a full partner, bringing decades of experience and his contractor's license. Marcus would handle estimates, customer relations, and the business side, while continuing his architecture practice part-time. Sarah would manage bookkeeping and scheduling. Kevin would start as an apprentice with a guaranteed position after completing his education. And me? I'd be the senior electrician, handling complex installations and training the next generation. What about a name? Tom asked. Morrison Family Electric sounds good, but maybe we want something that includes everyone? Generations Electric, Kevin suggested suddenly. You know, like different generations working together? Marcus smiled. I like that. It says something about experience and continuity. And growth, Sarah added. Like we're building something that will last. That afternoon, we drove around town looking at potential locations for a shop. Most of the available spaces were either too expensive or in poor condition, but on the outskirts of downtown, we found an old auto repair garage that had been empty for 2 years. It needs work, the landlord admitted as he showed us around. But the electrical service is already upgraded for commercial use, and there's plenty of space for a workshop and storage. The building was solid, with high ceilings, good lighting, and a loading dock for supplies. More importantly, the rent was reasonable, and the landlord was willing to let us make improvements in exchange for a longer lease. What do you think? Marcus asked, his architect's eye already seeing the possibilities. I said slowly, it looks like home. That evening, I called Eleanor's sister Janet in Florida. Janet and I had stayed in touch since the funeral, and she'd been encouraging me to find new purpose in retirement. Frank, you sound different, she said after I'd explained about the business. Happier. I feel different. Like I'm building something instead of just passing time. Eleanor would be so proud. She always worried about what you'd do with yourself after retiring. We talked for nearly an hour, and when we hung up, I realized Janet was right. I did sound different. For the first time since Eleanor's death, I was talking about the future with excitement instead of just trying to get through each day. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was having coffee and reviewing the lease agreement when someone knocked on my front door. Outside stood a woman I didn't recognize, maybe 40 years old, holding a manila folder. Mr. Morrison? I'm Linda Hayes from the Riverside County Small Business Development Center. Marcus Morrison asked me to stop by. I invited her in, wondering what Marcus had gotten me into now. I help new businesses navigate the licensing and regulatory requirements, she explained. Marcus thought you might benefit from some guidance as you formalize your electrical services. For the next 2 hours, Linda walked me through the paperwork involved in starting a legitimate electrical contracting business. Insurance requirements, bonding, tax implications, employee regulations. It was more complicated than I'd expected. The good news, she said as she packed up her materials, is that you're doing everything right so far. You have the experience, you're building a solid reputation, and you have a clear business plan. The bad news. She smiled. There is no bad news. This is exactly the kind of business our community needs. That afternoon, I met Kevin at the hardware store to pick up supplies for Mrs. Rodriguez's ceiling fan installation. As we loaded wire and electrical boxes into my truck, Kevin asked the question I'd been expecting. Mr. Morrison, are you sure about the college thing? I mean, what if I'm not smart enough for electrical engineering courses? First, I said, you're plenty smart. I've watched you troubleshoot circuits and learn complex concepts. You have good instincts. But what if? Kevin, I interrupted gently. What's the worst thing that could happen? You try and discover it's not for you. Then you've learned something important about yourself, and we help you figure out what comes next. He considered this as we drove to Mrs. Rodriguez's house. My dad keeps asking if I'm sure I don't want to go to regular college, he said eventually. What do you tell him? That working with electricity feels right. Like when I wire an outlet correctly and test it, and it works. There's something satisfying about that. Like I made something better. I understood exactly what he meant. That's called pride in craftsmanship, Kevin. Not everyone gets to experience that in their work. Mrs. Rodriguez's ceiling fan installation went smoothly, with Kevin handling most of the work while I supervised. Watching him carefully check his connections, test the circuits, and clean up the work area, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what teaching was supposed to feel like. Passing on not just knowledge but values, showing someone not just how to do something, but why it mattered to do it right. That evening, Marcus called with news. Dad, I talked to 3 different contractors today about subcontracting work. All of them said the same thing. There's more demand for residential electrical work than they can handle. If we can establish a reputation for quality and fair prices, we'll have more business than we know what to do with. How's the arm feeling? Better. Still can't use it for much, but the doctor says I'm healing well. I should be able to get the cast off next week. Good. I've missed having a proper assistant. Marcus laughed. I've missed feeling useful. This has been the longest 3 weeks of my life. After we hung up, I sat in my recliner thinking about usefulness. 3 weeks ago, Marcus had made me feel useless with 8 careless words. Now he was talking about missing the feeling himself. Maybe usefulness wasn't about age or strength or even experience. Maybe it was about showing up consistently, caring enough to do good work, and being willing to teach what you knew to the next person who needed to learn it. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tom. Talk to the landlord. He'll take our offer on the shop. When do we want to start renovations? I looked around my quiet living room, then at the business plan folder on the coffee table, then at the photo of Eleanor on the mantle. She was smiling in that picture, the way she smiled when she was proud of something. I texted back, how about tomorrow? It was exactly 1 week after we'd signed the lease on our new shop space. Tom and I had spent the morning installing better lighting in what would become our workshop area, while Kevin worked on organizing the storage room after school. The business was coming together faster than any of us had expected. We already had enough scheduled work to keep us busy through the summer. I was at home that evening, updating our job scheduling spreadsheet, when my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the caller ID, but something about the ringtone seemed urgent, insistent. Dad. Marcus's voice was tight with panic. I need help. Now. My heart jumped. What's wrong? Are you hurt? No, it's not that. It's the house. Something's wrong with the electrical system. The main breaker keeps tripping, and when I reset it, half the lights flicker and the other half don't work at all. I was already reaching for my keys. Where are you? At the house. Sarah's at her sister's for the night, and I was trying to install that new dishwasher we bought. I think I screwed something up badly. Don't touch anything else, I said firmly. Don't try to reset the breaker again. I'll be right there. The drive to Marcus's house took 12 minutes that felt like an hour. Through the windows, I could see the glow of flashlights moving around inside. Never a good sign when dealing with electrical problems. Marcus met me at the front door, holding a battery-powered lantern and looking shaken. Dad, I'm so sorry to call you this late, but I didn't know what else to do. I tried calling that emergency electrician service, but they want $300 just to come out, and even then they can't be here until tomorrow morning. I followed him into the kitchen, where my worst fears were confirmed. The dishwasher installation had been attempted but not completed. Wires hung loose from the cabinet opening, and I could smell the distinctive ozone scent that meant something had shorted out. Walk me through exactly what you did, I said, setting down my toolbox. Marcus explained how he'd followed the installation manual, connecting what he thought were the right wires to the dishwasher's electrical connection. But when he'd turned the power back on and tried to test the unit, there had been a loud pop, a bright flash, and then half the house had gone dark. I think I connected the hot and neutral backwards, he admitted miserably. I knelt down to examine the dishwasher connection more closely, using my flashlight to see the wire nuts and connections. It was worse than a simple backward connection. Somehow, he'd managed to create a short between the hot wire and the metal dishwasher frame, which had tripped not just the kitchen circuit breaker, but damaged the main panel's neutral bar. Marcus, I said carefully, this is going to take some time to fix properly. How long? I thought about the scope of the problem. The dishwasher would need to be rewired completely. The main panel would need repair, possibly replacement of the neutral bar assembly. Several circuits would need to be tested and potentially rewired if the short had damaged other components. Could be 4 or 5 hours. Maybe more. Marcus sank into one of the kitchen chairs, his head in his hands. Sarah's going to kill me. We just got settled in. Everything was working perfectly, and I had to go and mess it up. Hey, I said gently. Mistakes happen. That's why they make circuit breakers, to protect the house when something goes wrong. But I should have known better. I should have called you first. I looked at my son, 35 years old, successful in his own career, but feeling like a failure because he'd tried to install a dishwasher and made an error that any amateur might make. Marcus, Do you know how many service calls I went on during my career because professional contractors made wiring mistakes? He looked up. Really? Thousands. Electricians, plumbers, HVAC techs, everybody makes mistakes. The difference between a professional and an amateur isn't that professionals don't make mistakes. It's that professionals know how to fix them safely. I opened my toolbox and started laying out tools. Besides, you did exactly the right thing. You recognized you were in over your head. You turned off the power, and you called for help. At 10:30 on a Thursday night. Marcus, I said firmly, I spent 40 years on call for electrical emergencies. Do you think this is the first time I've gotten a panic call from someone who tried a DIY project and got in trouble? That got a small smile. Probably not. Definitely not. Now, do you want to help me fix this, or do you want to sit there feeling sorry for yourself? He stood up immediately. I want to help. What followed was one of the most educational evenings either of us had experienced in years. I walked Marcus through every step of the repair process, explaining not just what we were doing but why. How to safely test circuits with a multimeter. How to identify damaged components. How to properly size wire for appliance connections. The key thing to remember, I said as we carefully rewired the dishwasher connection, is that electricity follows the path of least resistance. When you accidentally connected the hot wire to the dishwasher frame, you gave it a shortcut to ground that bypassed all the safety systems. Like water flowing downhill, Marcus said, remembering lessons from 20 years ago. Exactly. Except water won't kill you if you make a mistake. By 2 in the morning, we had everything working again. The main panel was repaired, the dishwasher was properly connected and tested, and all the house circuits were functioning normally. I can't believe we got it all fixed in one night, Marcus said as we cleaned up the tools. You did most of the work, I pointed out. I just provided guidance. Dad, Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. When I said you were too old to help me, I wasn't just worried about the physical work. I was worried that if something went wrong, if we made mistakes, it would somehow be your fault. I looked at him, understanding finally dawning. You were trying to protect me. Yeah. From feeling responsible if the project didn't go perfectly. From having to work harder than you should at your age. He gestured helplessly. I don't know. From having a son who needed his father too much. The honesty in his voice was painful to hear. How had we gotten to a place where asking for help felt like a burden instead of a connection? Marcus, I said slowly. Do you know what made me feel old? He shook his head. Not being needed. Not being asked. Sitting in my empty house wondering if I had anything useful left to offer the world. I packed the last of the tools into my toolbox. Tonight, fixing this problem with you. Teaching you how to troubleshoot circuits and repair damaged connections. This is the youngest I've felt in years. We stood in his kitchen at 2:30 in the morning, surrounded by the evidence of disaster averted and problems solved, and I saw tears in my son's eyes. I'm sorry, Dad. For all of it. For making you feel like you weren't needed. For trying to protect you when what you really needed was to be useful. And I'm sorry for letting pride get in the way of understanding what you were really trying to say. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work. The first time in 2 years, he told me, and spent the day at our new shop, helping Tom and Kevin set up workbenches and organize tools. His cast was due to come off the following week, and he was eager to get back to physical work. You know, Tom said as we watched Marcus and Kevin collaborate on assembling a parts storage system. That boy of yours has good instincts. Maybe not with dishwasher installation, but with people and planning. He gets that from his mother, I said. The electrical aptitude comes from you, though? He was asking smart questions about load calculations and circuit design. That afternoon, our first official customer called. Mrs. Patterson's sister needed her kitchen rewired, and she'd heard about our new business from the community center bulletin board. Generations Electric? I answered, still getting used to saying the business name. Is this Frank Morrison? I heard you do good work at fair prices. Yes, ma'am. When would you like us to take a look? As I scheduled the appointment, I caught Marcus's eye. He was smiling, the kind of smile I remembered from his childhood when he'd accomplished something he was proud of. Later that evening, as I was updating our scheduling system, Marcus called. Dad, Sarah and I have been talking, and we want to make the partnership official as soon as possible. We'd like to put together a family dinner this weekend to celebrate the launch of Generations Electric. That sounds nice. Who did you want to invite? Everyone who helped make it happen. Tom and Jenny, Kevin and his family, Maria Santos and her kids, Mrs. Rodriguez, Mrs. Chun, all the neighbors who've been supporting us. I thought about that dinner table, filled with people who'd become family through the simple act of helping each other. I said, that would be perfect. The dinner party was Sarah's idea, but it quickly grew beyond anything she'd originally planned. What started as a simple family celebration became a neighborhood gathering that filled Marcus and Sarah's new house with warmth, laughter, and the kind of chaotic joy that comes when 3 generations and multiple families try to coordinate a potluck dinner. Tom and Ginny arrived first, carrying a casserole dish that smelled like heaven and a bottle of wine for the hosts. Kevin came with his parents and grandparents, plus his sister Amy, who was home from college for the weekend. Maria Santos brought her 3 children and enough homemade tamales to feed an army. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived with her famous tres leches cake, and even Mrs. Chun from the apartment above the Chinese restaurant came, carrying a tray of dumplings she'd made that morning. By 6 o'clock, Marcus and Sarah's dining room table had been extended with card tables and folding chairs borrowed from 3 different neighbors, and the conversation was flowing in English, Spanish, and what I assumed was Mandarin. This is what Eleanor always wanted. I found myself telling Ginny Bradley as we watched the chaos from the kitchen. A house full of people, everyone talking over each other, kids running around. She would have loved this, Ginny agreed. Tom talks about her sometimes, Says she was the one who kept all the power company families connected. It was true. Eleanor had organized the holiday parties, remembered everyone's birthdays, made sure newcomers felt welcome. After she died, those connections had faded, and I'd let them. But somehow, through fixing people's electrical problems and teaching Kevin and partnering with Marcus, I'd stumbled into a new kind of community. Not the old one recreated, but something different and equally valuable. Attention everyone, Marcus called from the living room, tapping his water glass with a fork. If I could have everyone gather around for a minute, I'd like to say something. The conversations gradually died down as people moved from the kitchen and dining room into the living room. Diego Santos, now 9 and still fascinated by electricity, positioned himself right in front of me with the serious attention of someone who considered himself my unofficial apprentice. 3 months ago, Marcus began, his cast-free arm gesturing naturally as he spoke. I made one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I told my father he was too old to help me. A few people chuckled, and I felt my cheeks warm slightly. What I learned, Marcus continued, is that help isn't about age or strength or even ability. It's about showing up when someone needs you, bringing whatever you have to offer, and caring enough to do the job right. He looked directly at me. Dad, you didn't just help Sarah and me with our house. You showed all of us what community really means. You turned a moment of rejection into an opportunity to serve others. And in doing so, you created something beautiful. Hear, hear, Tom called out, raising his wine glass. To Generations Electric, Kevin added, and suddenly everyone was raising glasses and coffee cups and whatever they were drinking. To Frank Morrison, Maria Santos said, her voice carrying clearly over the crowd, who taught us that neighbors take care of neighbors. To the man who fixed our lights, Diego chimed in seriously, and taught me that electricity is like water in pipes. The toasts continued around the room, each person sharing something about how our little electrical business had touched their lives. Mrs. Rodriguez talked about feeling safe in her home now that her flickering lights were fixed. Mrs. Chin mentioned how much easier her life had become with proper heating. Kevin's parents expressed gratitude for the mentorship and college support their son was receiving. When it was my turn to speak, I found myself looking around the room at faces that had become dear to me over the past few months. Neighbors who had become friends, customers who had become family, a teenage apprentice who reminded me daily why teaching mattered. When Marcus told me I was too old to help, I said, it hurt, but it also freed me to discover something I'd forgotten, that there are many ways to be useful in this world, and age doesn't disqualify you from any of them. I paused, thinking about how to express what I'd learned. Eleanor used to say that the best gifts are the ones you don't know you need until someone gives them to you. I thought retirement was about rest and relaxation. What I discovered was that I needed purpose more than I needed ease, community more than quiet, and the chance to pass on what I'd learned more than the freedom from responsibility. I looked at Kevin, who was listening with the intense focus he brought to everything electrical. Kevin, You've reminded me what it feels like to have someone trust you with their future. That's a gift. Then at Tom, my old colleague who'd embraced this new adventure with enthusiasm. Tom, you've shown me that partnership makes everything better. The work is easier, the successes are sweeter, and the problems are more manageable when you share them. Finally, I looked at Marcus and Sarah. And you two taught me that family isn't just about blood relationships. It's about choosing to show up for each other, especially when it's difficult. To family, Sarah said softly, raising her glass. To family, everyone echoed. As the evening wound down and people began gathering their dishes and saying their goodbyes, I found myself on the back porch with Marcus, looking out at the yard where we'd installed security lighting the week before. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever miss the way things used to be? Before Mom got sick, when it was just the three of us. I considered the question carefully. I miss your mother every day. I miss the specific life we had together, the plans we made, the future we thought we were going to have. But I wouldn't trade what we've built now for anything. The business, the people we're helping, Kevin's apprenticeship, even this conversation, it's all good in a different way. Marcus nodded. I keep thinking about what Mom would say about all this. What do you think she'd say? That it took us long enough to figure it out, he said with a laugh. She always said we were both too stubborn for our own good. She was right about that. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of our friends finishing their conversations inside. Dad, I want you to know that I'm proud of what we've accomplished. Not just the business, but this. He gestured toward the house full of people, finding our way back to each other. Me too, son. Kevin appeared in the doorway, looking slightly uncertain. Mr. Morrison? My parents are ready to go, but I wanted to ask you something first. What's that? I've been accepted to the electrical technology program at the community college. I can start in the fall and still work for Generations Electric part-time. The pride I felt was almost overwhelming. Kevin, that's wonderful news. I couldn't have done it without you. I mean, I didn't even know I wanted to be an electrician before I met you. You figured out what you were good at and what made you feel useful, I said. That's not something I taught you. That's something you discovered about yourself. Still, Kevin said, thank you for everything. After everyone had gone home and we'd finished cleaning up, Marcus, Sarah, and I sat around their kitchen table with cups of decaf coffee, exhausted but happy. I've been thinking, Sarah said, about what you said earlier about Eleanor and the gifts you don't know you need. I think maybe that's what happened with all of us. How so? Well, Marcus needed to learn how to ask for help without feeling like he was burdening you. You needed to discover that being useful doesn't have an expiration date. And I needed to see what it looks like when 3 generations work together toward a common goal. She was right. We'd all gotten things we didn't know we needed. What's next for Generations Electric? Marcus asked. I pulled out my worn notebook, now supplemented with Sarah's professional scheduling system and Marcus's architectural drawings of the shop renovation. We've got 17 jobs scheduled over the next 6 weeks, I said. Tom wants to add a service truck so we can handle emergency calls more efficiently. Kevin starts college in September, but wants to keep working weekends. And Mrs. Patterson's sister has 3 friends who want estimates for electrical upgrades. Sounds like we're going to be busy, Sarah observed. Good busy, Marcus added. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. 3 months ago, I'd felt useless, rejected by my son's casual dismissal, wondering what purpose my life could have in retirement. Tonight, I was the senior partner in a growing business, mentor to an eager apprentice, and part of a community that had formed around the simple principle of neighbors helping neighbors. Eleanor had been right about gifts you don't know you need. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having your expectations shattered, your pride wounded, and your assumptions challenged. Sometimes you have to lose your sense of purpose before you can find a better one. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed that the porch light Mrs. Patterson's nephew had installed last month was flickering slightly. I made a mental note to check the connection tomorrow. After all, even electricians needed to maintain their own homes. But for tonight, I was content to sit in my quiet living room, looking at the photo of Eleanor on the mantle and sharing the day's events with her the way I had every night since her funeral. You would have loved tonight, I told her picture. The house was full of people, just like you always wanted. Marcus and I are working together again, and I think we're building something that's going to last. The photo smiled back at me, the same warm smile that had sustained me through 43 years of marriage and 5 years of widowhood. In the soft lamplight, I could almost hear her voice. "I'm proud of you, Frank. You figured it out." Maybe I had. Maybe we all had. 6 months later, I was standing in the workshop of Generations Electric, watching Kevin demonstrate proper wire stripping technique to Maria Santos's oldest son, Diego, who had been begging for months to learn real electrical work. At 14, Diego was still too young for anything beyond basic tool organization and safety training. But his enthusiasm reminded me of myself at that age, fascinated by anything that involved figuring out how things worked. The key, Kevin was explaining with the patient authority of someone who'd recently mastered the skill himself, is to strip just enough insulation to make a good connection, but not so much that you expose wire that doesn't need to be exposed. I smiled, remembering saying almost exactly the same words to Kevin 8 months earlier. It was gratifying to watch him pass on what he'd learned, already developing his own teaching style. Tom emerged from the office area we'd built in the corner of the shop, waving a piece of paper. "Frank, we just got our biggest contract yet. The Riverside Elementary School needs their entire electrical system updated over summer break." I looked at the scope of work Tom had outlined. It was substantial, a 3-month project that would require all of us working full-time, plus probably 2 additional temporary workers. "Think we can handle it?" I asked. "I think we'd be crazy to turn it down," Tom replied. "This is the kind of job that establishes a business's reputation." Through the shop's front window, I could see Marcus's truck pulling into our small parking lot. He'd been spending more time at the shop since his architectural practice had slowed down for the winter, and he'd proven invaluable at estimating complex jobs and managing client relationships. "Dad, Tom, I've got news," Marcus announced as he came through the door, holding a manila envelope and grinning. "We just got approved for the business expansion loan." The loan application had been Sarah's idea. With more work than we could handle and a waiting list of customers, it made sense to formalize our growth, hire additional employees, and maybe even consider a second location. "How much?" Tom asked. "Enough to hire 2 full-time electricians, buy a second service truck, and build out that training area we've been talking about." The training area had been my suggestion, a dedicated space where we could teach basic electrical skills to young people who might be interested in the trade. Not everyone had the opportunity Kevin had stumbled into, and I'd been thinking a lot about how to create more pathways into skilled work for kids who weren't college-bound. "Speaking of training," I said, "I got a call this morning from the high school guidance counselor. They want to know if we'd be interested in hosting students for a work-study program." Kevin looked up from his wire stripping demonstration with Diego. "Really? That would be cool. How many students?" Marcus asked. "She mentioned starting with maybe 4 or 5, but if it goes well, they'd like to expand it. Apparently, there's a lot of interest in hands-on career training." We spent the next hour discussing the expansion plans, dividing up responsibilities and timelines. Tom would handle the hiring and equipment purchases. Marcus would work with the bank and manage the regulatory paperwork. Sarah would update our business systems to handle the increased volume, and I would develop the training curriculum. As we wrapped up our planning session, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Generations Electric, this is Frank." "Mr. Morrison? This is Janet Holloway. You fixed my water heater a few months ago." I remembered Janet, the elderly woman whose thermocouple had failed, leaving her without hot water for 4 days. "Of course, Mrs. Holloway. What can I do for you?" "Well, I have a problem, but it's not electrical this time. My nephew was supposed to help me with some heavy cleaning in my basement, but he's in the hospital with his back, and I don't know who else to call." I looked around the shop at Tom, Marcus, Kevin, and Diego, all listening to my side of the conversation. "What kind of help do you need?" "There are some old appliances down there that need to be moved out, and I can't manage them by myself. I know you're probably too busy with real electrical work to bother with something like this." "Mrs. Holloway," I interrupted gently, "we'll be happy to help. When would be convenient for you?" The relief in her voice was unmistakable. "Really? Oh, bless you. Would this afternoon be too soon?" After I hung up, Marcus was shaking his head with amusement. "Dad, you realize we're going to become the neighborhood go-to service for everything, not just electrical work." "Would that be so bad?" I asked. "Not bad at all. Just funny. We started as an electrical contracting business, and we're turning into something more like, I don't know, Community support services. Tom laughed. In my experience, good businesses grow into what their customers actually need, not just what they originally planned to provide. That afternoon, all of us, Tom, Marcus, Kevin, Diego, and I, drove to Janet Holloway's house with Tom's pickup truck. What we found in her basement was the accumulated detritus of 78 years of life. Broken appliances, boxes of papers, furniture that had been stored for decades. I keep meaning to deal with all this, Janet said apologetically, but it's overwhelming when you're by yourself. Don't worry about it, Marcus assured her. We've got plenty of hands. For the next 3 hours, we hauled, sorted, and organized. Kevin and Diego worked together to break down old cardboard boxes for recycling. Tom identified which appliances might be salvageable and which needed to go to the scrapyard. Marcus and I moved furniture and carried the heavy items up the basement stairs. As we worked, Janet told us stories about the items we were handling. The washing machine that had served her family for 25 years, the Christmas decorations her late husband had put up every December, the high chair that had been used by her children and grandchildren. It's hard to let go of things, she said as we loaded the last of the discarded items into the truck. Even when you know you don't need them anymore. I understood exactly what she meant. After Eleanor died, it had taken me 2 years to donate her clothes, and I still had boxes of her books and papers I couldn't bring myself to sort through. Mrs. Holloway, I said, holding on to things isn't about the objects themselves. It's about holding on to the memories and the people connected to them. She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Exactly. As we prepared to leave, Janet pressed an envelope into my hand, despite my protests that payment wasn't necessary. It's not payment, she said firmly. It's a donation to that training program you mentioned, for young people who want to learn useful skills. In the truck on the way back to the shop, Diego was unusually quiet. What are you thinking about? I asked him. Mrs. Holloway, he said. She reminded me of my abuela back in Mexico. The way she talked about her family, how hard it was to let go of things. Is your grandmother still in Mexico? Yeah. My mom wants to bring her here, but it's complicated. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Mr. Morrison, do you think I could really become an electrician? Like, for real? The question caught me off guard with its earnestness. Diego, you're smart, you work hard, and you care about doing things right. Those are the most important qualifications for any job. But I'm not like Kevin. I don't have parents who can help pay for college. I glanced at Marcus in the rearview mirror, and he nodded slightly, understanding passing between us. Diego, I said, there are different paths to the same destination. Kevin is taking college classes while working part-time. But there are also full apprenticeship programs where you earn money while you learn. The important thing is that you keep working hard and don't give up on what you want. And, Marcus added, there are people who want to help young people succeed. You're not in this alone. When we got back to the shop, Tom opened Janet's envelope and counted out $200 in cash, along with a handwritten note. For the electricians of tomorrow. Thank you for helping an old lady today. You know what this means, Sarah said when Marcus told her about Janet's donation that evening over dinner. We need to make the training program official. I've been thinking about that, I said. What if we partnered with the high school and the community college to create a real pathway from basic education to skilled work? Students could start learning in high school, do internships with us, then go on to formal training programs. Like a pipeline, Kevin suggested. From classroom to workshop to career. Exactly. Marcus leaned back in his chair, that thoughtful expression he got when he was working through a complex problem. We'd need funding, curriculum development, partnerships with other contractors. It sounds like a lot of work, Sarah observed. The best things usually are, Tom said. Over the following weeks, the idea grew and took shape. Marcus reached out to his contacts in the architectural and construction communities. Sarah researched grant opportunities for vocational training programs. Tom and I began developing a curriculum that would teach not just technical skills, but also work ethics, safety practices, and business basics. Kevin, now in his second semester at community college and consistently earning top grades, became our unofficial recruiter, talking to classmates who might be interested in electrical work and connecting with high school students through a career mentoring program. The breakthrough came when the mayor called personally to ask if Generations Electric would be interested in participating in a new city initiative called Skills for Tomorrow. designed to address the shortage of skilled workers in essential trades. The program would provide funding for equipment and training, the mayor explained during our meeting in her office, in exchange for a commitment to train a certain number of local young people each year. It was exactly what we needed. On a warm spring evening, almost exactly 1 year after Marcus had told me I was too old to help him, I found myself back at his and Sarah's house for another family dinner. But this time, the gathering included not just our original extended family, but also the 4 high school students who would be starting our first official apprenticeship program in the fall, their parents, and several city officials who had helped make the program possible. As I looked around the crowded table, listening to conversations about electrical theory and career opportunities and community development, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. A year ago, I'd felt rejected, useless, too old to contribute. Tonight, I was part of something that was growing beyond anything I could have imagined, not just a business, but a way of passing on skills and knowledge and values to the next generation. Marcus stood up to offer the traditional toast, and the room gradually quieted. A year ago, he said, I made a mistake that changed all of our lives. I told my father he was too old to help me. What I've learned since then is that age isn't about how many years you've lived. It's about whether you're still growing, still learning, still finding new ways to be useful. He raised his glass. To everyone at this table who proves every day that the best time to start something new is whenever you decide to begin. To new beginnings, I added, raising my own glass and looking directly at the 4 teenagers who would soon be learning to strip wire, test circuits, and understand that electricity, like life, flows along the path of least resistance but can be safely channeled toward useful purposes. To family, Sarah said, smiling at the crowd of neighbors, friends, apprentices, and relatives who had somehow become one interconnected community. To family, everyone echoed. Later, as people were beginning to gather their things and say their goodbyes, Marcus pulled me aside one more time. Dad, I want you to know that everything we've built this year, the business, the relationships, the training program, it all started because you refused to accept that you were too old to help. No, I corrected him gently. It started because you helped me understand that there are many ways to help, and age doesn't disqualify you from any of them. It started because we both learned that pride is less important than purpose, and that family isn't just about blood, it's about showing up for each other. Still, Marcus said, thank you for proving me wrong in the best possible way. As I drove home that night, I passed the community center where I'd first seen Maria Santos's pink construction paper plea for electrical help. The bulletin board was still there, probably still covered with small requests from neighbors who needed assistance with various problems. But now there was also a permanent sign in the window: Generations Electric, professional service, community-focused, training the next generation of skilled workers. At home, I sat in my recliner with Eleanor's photo on the side table and my job notebook, now supplemented with training materials and apprenticeship schedules, on my lap. Well, I said to her picture, it's been quite a year. And it had been. From feeling too old to help anyone, I discovered that I was exactly the right age to help everyone. From thinking retirement meant stepping back from purpose, I'd learned that the best purposes sometimes come to you when you're not looking for them. From a moment of rejection, we'd built something that would outlast all of us, a way of passing on not just technical knowledge, but the understanding that good work, done with care and shared with others, is its own reward. The phone rang. Probably another neighbor with an electrical problem or another young person interested in learning a trade. I reached for it with a smile. After all, I wasn't too old to help. I was just getting started.